Hello and welcome to the Judo Way of Life podcast. Today I'm joined by Mark Brewer. Hello Mark, how's it going?
Good man, good to be here. Thanks for the invite. Look forward to chatting to you.
Yeah, no, good. Let's say got you on to primarily talk about strength and conditioning, specifically for judo and grappling as a whole. Maybe you just start off quickly with your background in judo, because you had a pretty long career as a high-level athlete as well yourself.
Yeah, although I live in Sydney, I'm from a small town in New Zealand called Motueka, and up until I finished high school, I kind of traveled between Motueka and Nelson, training at those judo clubs until I left high school. I went to Japan and then Germany, spent a couple of years around Europe, went to Britain for another couple of years, and ended up back here in Sydney. Yeah, training in Germany. I trained with some of the Olympic team there, and then in Britain I trained in Edinburgh and Scotland. Yeah, with some of their representatives. And
well, that's where we first met, competed, trained together. I think it was the Scottish Open in 2010.
Yeah, you reminded me of that the other day when I was chatting to you on the phone.
We did a training camp. There's the post-competition training camp in Raffo. Yeah,
100%, man.
It was
That brings me back. I couldn't even remember the results from that competition.
Yeah.
Right? Until I got home, I was like, hey, wait a minute. Yeah. Oh, I got second on that one, eh?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, they got beat you in the final, beat me in the semis.
Oh, yeah, right.
I'm pretty sure it was a Danish boy. Not that it really matters. But
Tom won that.
Was it Tom?
Yeah. I remember the final.
Maybe I lost in the quarters then. I think I got bronze. Anyway, whatever.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah, no, moving on. And then, so you also went on to compete at the Commonwealth Games in 2014? Again in Scotland?
Yeah, that's right, yeah. It's like home turf.
Yeah.
That was good, going back there to compete. Yeah, won my first one, ended up fifth, I think. No, seventh.
And that was in the under 90s?
Under 81.
Well, under 81s?
Yeah, it was after that I went up. I had too many injuries and staying lean for that long it didn't really suit me. So I went on up to 90s after that.
Yeah, well, we'll talk about that a bit more in terms of I want to talk to you about weight management and training a bit later on. But then, so post 2014, you said you came back to Sydney. How have things progressed in terms of transitioning from an athlete into more of a coaching role?
I guess when I was competing, I wanted to put 100% into my career. So I went all out. It's like I started my education by correspondence when I was living in Edinburgh. And it wasn't really my learning style either. It's kind of like online and I'm that person that just needs to talk to people and throw ideas back and forward to learn. And because of that, I moved to Sydney to actually partly to finish that degree and continue my journey towards, Olympic Games. But it didn't really work out that way because basically I was just working and training and I didn't have time for study for one. But the second thing is HECS wasn't something that was available to me. So I couldn't borrow any money from the government to actually go and do that education. It was just a struggle. So I just put everything into judo, and as you know, as an unfunded athlete, you have to pay your own way. So you're basically working to fund your judo. Therefore, I didn't have any other funds to put into my education at that time. So I basically said, okay, beyond 2016, I draw the line, and I'll finish my education then. So, up until then, I was kind of working in the industry as a PT, and I did courses, along the way, like Poliquin and Exos, and basically I've done everything, all the significant certificates, up until then. So basically, having done everything else in the industry, I had nothing else to do but finish my degree. So, by the time I went back to my degree, it was kind of obsolete. All my credits I got from the first stint at uni were obsolete. And obviously I needed to put myself in a position where I could pay for it. So, I established a business, which was Fighters Performance, working with other strength conditioning coach. And basically now I'm in that position. I went back to uni and I just started the whole thing again. I didn't bother accrediting my industry experience. I didn't bother, trying to accredit some of what I did at uni prior. I just wanted to go from start to finish and get there.
So now you've done the IGF coaching course for the judo at the same time, different levels. You seem to have gravitated more towards strength and conditioning and that side of coaching rather than maybe I know you also work at the UTS as a judo coach, but the strength and conditioning seems to be more of your focus. Why is that?
I've always seen a great benefit in spending time strength and conditioning as an athlete. And I knew there was a lot more that could be taken from other avenues and even other sports that contribute to the development and, the progress within judo. So, I just saw a lot more that I could take from strength and conditioning and contribute to the world of judo. My goal is to give back to judo and combat sports as a whole. But yeah, I mean, I still keep my hand in it as a coach. I still do judo because I love it. I want that to be part of my life ongoing. And, something that I really enjoy doing. So I just felt from the start, I come from a small town called Motueka, right? So I didn't have that $1 million team behind me. And New Zealand, they're all unfunded. There's no money towards judo really and the athlete development process. So I always knew I'd need those assets for myself, that knowledge to develop my own attributes and ability to compete at the top level. So I knew it would come in handy, along the way, learning and developing that knowledge assisted me in my judo career and also was something that would contribute to my actual career post, finishing and retiring from judo. Yeah, as I said, there's just so much to be taken from strength and conditioning and the principles, the research that can be applied to not only coaching, but, the athletes and given a pathway much like mine. We all need these resources and this is really, my goal is to kind of contribute to that. And, I want to invest all things which allow athletes to maximize their training and keep them on the mat doing what they love.
Yeah, fantastic. Earlier on, I was saying about when I've sat down and critically evaluated my judo career as an athlete, and one of my, if failings is the right word, but an area where I feel as though potentially let me down was my lack of understanding about strength and conditioning. In my early 20s, I thought I was, not that I knew it all, but I thought I knew what I was doing in terms of my program and didn't really have a specific S&C coach. And I suppose that's one of the reasons why I've got more of an interest in it now, because I look back on it and realise I had no idea what I was doing. And I was sort of trying to make it up as I went along, right? Now, as you mentioned, lack of funding and, trying to figure it out and all these things. How would, say if you've got an athlete in a similar position, judo player who's sort of coming up, what kind of advice would you give them starting out in looking for better resources or coaches for strength and conditioning specifically?
Yeah, I basically searched the world for a team, and an infrastructure that could take me the whole way. But, no other team's going to really develop someone from another country to the point where they're competitive for Olympic gold medal, So it's tough. You've really got to find these resources. But the good thing is nowadays they are available. And, as an athlete, we're all influenced by things like people and YouTube and social media that endorse one tool and which is inherently held back by the loading parameters and how you do it and how much and the variation and certain things like that. We're also influenced by many of the cultural aspects of judo. And some of those that do more judo get better at judo. And essentially, it's a paradox because strength and conditioning is basically management of those stresses, whether good or bad, whether life stresses or the applied stresses from judo or from your strength and conditioning. And it's like, well, training allows you to increase the amount you can do. If you do strength and conditioning, you improve your ability and your fitness to be able to do more, right? Complete more judo training, you get better. But without that, you've really got a cap on how much you can do before your body, experiences too much stress and you don't get the adaptation you need. You don't you get more injuries than you do ability to do judo. So it's like, and then other influences, things like, the regimens they put in place, which are like stretching. Inherently, stretching opens more range of motion, right? But that range of motion, the tissue isn't or hasn't developed tolerance to the forces you are exposed to. And in judo and in grappling, you are exposed to large forces. So basically opening that tissue to forces they aren't able to stop and slow and utilize. That's when tissue is more susceptible to the chronic and acute, injury, right? So strength and conditioning is a puzzle also. It's pretty complex in itself, and essentially managing those stresses to create beneficial adaptations to allow you to compete. But the goal is to maximize development over a period of time. And, people educate for years to kind of put themselves in a position to have a position in professional sport and be at the top of that game. So I certainly didn't have all the answers like you, but, and I kind of looked for those top tier kind of, the people in those positions to kind of guide me. But, we're kind of lucky nowadays it's more available. And in the private sector, there are strength and conditioning coaches that are dedicated to, giving athletes the professional resources that they need to utilize to get to the top of their game. I believe, the earlier you can do that, the better. Because it's not something you can just drop into, like 12 weeks out from competition and go, I'm preparing. But, it's something you got to think about years before. Like, think about the years of development you had, strength and conditioning. And it's the accumulation of these, 12-week blocks that really makes a difference and makes you a competitive athlete, not just one shot at a competition. You need to be thinking about years before and really get that work done prior to that, right?
Yeah, it was something we had with our training. The bit you mentioned there that resonated with me was that you say the 12-week blocks, and we didn't really have any, or I didn't have any kind of like periodization in my program. It was just, all right, well, we're just doing this, we'll just see how it goes. And, there was no real sort of critical analysis of the program. And I was very much stuck in my, okay, well, this is what we're doing, stuff like rope climbs. It was like all the right things, but it wasn't put together correctly. Right? It's like having all the ingredients for a cake and ended up making something like, just an absolute mess, right? And so we had all the stuff there, and it was just trying to piece it all together in the correct way. So when you say an athlete comes to you as the fire performance, and they're maybe a relatively new athlete, in terms of strength and conditioning wise, they're maybe doing judo for a while, and they're looking to take it to the next level. Where do you start in terms of building a program for them in terms of time spent on stretching, or obviously you got strength, the split between strength and conditioning. How do you look to approach that writing a program?
So the first thing you've got to do is assessments, because everybody's going to have their strengths, their weaknesses, but also your assessments really give you an idea of how they maintain themselves under their body weight and move effectively, and that's going to dictate how they move against force and resistance. Doing the assessments and, seeing how much they can lift, how fast they can move weight. Those kind of aspects are underpinned by their movement mechanics. And then it's kind of screening them for, how they move underweight to effectively utilize and progress and start a program that's going to give them the maximal kind of results and improvement, right? So identifying their movement weaknesses and also their weaknesses in terms of fitness and what goes into their sport, what aspects are most important to developing. First, essentially, you need to make them an athlete, someone that can move in essentially not just forward and back, because a majority of the programs are built around just forward and back movements, where judo, as you know, is multi-directional, and you got to develop strength and the ability to oppose and produce force in multiple directions. So it's really important to kind of build that athlete first and then look at the key aspects and build upon them. So within a general preparation phase, and then a specific preparation phase, and then you've got for some athletes, they've got an early fight camp, a late fight camp. It's just developing the specifics within each one of those phases to maximize their training, but also it's important to factor in the stress, right? Because training for judo and combat sports, whether it be grappling, is underpinned by the fact that this is a tool to improve your grappling, your judo. And it's not the sole aspect of what you do. And I think what gives someone the ability to develop a program knowing what stresses that athlete is opposing on the mat is a key aspect to this as well. And, for yourself, knowing what these athletes go through in their training and know what it feels like and know what volumes they're doing and know, how the stimulus, how that stress affects the body, then gives you more of an idea to tailor a program towards making sure the stress you then apply doesn't take them further into overtraining, but actually further increases their ability to tolerate that force and load and, monitor. So you can monitor that and eventually, week to week, get that progress you need to improve their ability to do more judo. And that's essentially what it's about.
Yeah, I really like that point where you're saying about to supplement the judo. The judo's got to be the main focus. And I think sometimes, I know in my career when I was an athlete, and also conversations I've had with other athletes, that it's sometimes forgotten that judo is the main point and everything else is meant to supplement that. And sometimes the supplementary training it would hinder the judo. It'd be too sore, or you'd have gone maybe too close. You'd done your weight too close to judo, and it would actually have a negative impact on the main focus of the session, that being the judo. How do you look to sort of, like you say, manage that with the program? Do you have certain requirements? Okay, we're only going to do this kind of session here in the program, so it doesn't affect, or in terms of intensity, or maybe choice of exercises?
100%. Like, the choice of exercise is important. That's why I say, watching people on YouTube and those people that, use one kind of modality to train people, it's like having the variety, having the ability to utilize a barbell or a trap bar, in fact, for that individual to take stresses off and then maybe increase the height of the bar so you have less neural stress on the body, so you make sure that athlete has that adaptation, isn't pushing themselves too far so they don't inherently impact their judo, right? And also it's like utilizing the right methods at the right time to make sure they're feeling good in their training and they can actually do judo to the full extent. And judo in itself, it's a hard sport, right? You need the ability to utilize that technique to its full intent. And if you fatigue someone too much, if you're, just pulling weights and not doing enough speed work, you're going to get them slow and they're going to feel slow in their training, and that isn't good either. So it's just utilizing the right methods, the right tools at the right time to get that effect. But also week to week, it's important to first start with your, as an athlete, looking at your weekly periodization. So, most programs that have a couple of red days, 2 to 3 red days a week, and that means, those are the intense days during the week. And what you want to do is kind of put your moderate days and low intensity days around that. So whether you train 6 days or you train 5, you want to undulate your weekly load to allow for your acute recovery, so you can put more effort into those training sessions. So, a good strength and conditioning coach is going to help you juggle those things and make sure the stress on your body is what you can tolerate, and also what is going to give you that improvement, allow you to recover so you can, do the best judo on the mat. A couple of key rules to that. What the found is injuries are more prevalent, when that weekly stress is increased beyond a certain point. So week to week, you don't want to pick your total load and intensity up by more than 10%. So from week to week, just try and improve it just a little bit. Beyond that 10% is where they've found a lot of injuries come into play. And try to create those higher intensity days by strategically placing some of the strength and conditioning, some of the fitness aspects you're doing around your judo. And obviously judo is that key aspect, so point it towards making the most of those sessions.
You mentioned there about recovery and obviously overtraining resulting in injury. Is recovery, would you put that into the program as specific blocks and maybe types of recovery? Is that something you would include in your training programs for your athletes?
Yeah, for sure. Like, it obviously depends on the athlete. It depends on their physical attributes, because obviously yourself, you've done a load of judo, you've done a load of strength and conditioning. You're going to be able to tolerate a lot more than someone coming through and just developing those tolerances to the stress. Right, so you just really got to look at the individual attributes of the athlete and how much they can tolerate. From person to person, it varies. But yes, with all those people, you've got to look at your green days, your orange days, and your red days. So basically, in your green day, that's when you have your RPEs of 5 to 6. And you do some of that work that kind of induces the recovery state. You definitely utilize recovery modalities throughout the week to try and encourage that rehabilitation. And especially, after those hard sessions, you can utilize just methods of kind of taking the body back to, a recovery state. So a parasympathetic state where the body's going to recover. We all know those feelings finishing judo on a high and just, I literally go home thinking judo is awesome, man. I love judo, and I'm just high on judo, right? I love it, and my sympathetic state is still really high, and I'm not yet in that recovery state. So it's like taking your body back down to within 10 beats per minute of your resting heart rate. After a session, things like that are going to put your body in a more recovery inducive state to get that, right? But if you go home, we all know how it feels when we're going home. We really had a good session, and we just don't sleep, right? We can't eat, because we just, oh man, want to do more judo, right? Yeah.
Just at the back, what you said there about can't eat, I wanted to ask you, just touch on maybe a little bit of nutrition quickly.
Yeah.
In terms of when to eat with training, because I'm the same. I really struggle if I've done any kind of running, cardio based exercise, right, and then obviously judo's quite cardio based. I did a big session. I really struggle to eat after training, and I have to force food down, because I know if I don't eat at night after training, I wake up in the morning, I feel like I've been run over by a bus, because I just haven't got any kind of nutrition back in my body, right? It just hasn't been able to recover. Is nutrition something you work with your athletes? Is that side of things you do, or?
100%. Like, I think I am a strength and conditioning coach, and I stay in my lane. But we do need to give advice to our athletes, and what I endorse is just an overview of their nutrition. And because a lot of combat athletes and judo and grappling athletes, they are weight making athletes, so they need this review. You've got to know that they are getting the right nutrition and to make sure they're getting the recovery to actually take on this workload they're doing. And you've got to kind of look for these, make sure they're getting their total calories in for one, make sure they're getting enough in for the workload they're doing, and then making sure they're getting the macronutrients behind that. And for weight making athletes, depending on the period of time, they need to be getting a high amount of protein in to make sure they maintain muscle mass when they're in weight loss, but also make sure they're recovering from the training. They need carbohydrates to make sure they've got the energy to do the training they need to do. And then fats are also important. So we've got key predictors, I suppose, of what is necessary for these athletes. And then comes certain aspects like, iron and calcium and fiber and those sort of things. But that's as far as we go. During a weight making process, that's something I would really highly recommend you get a nutritionist for. But yeah, like, we have to give advice on the recovery aspect and making sure they have enough energy for sessions. So it's like nutrient timing is essentially what they call it, but you do need food to refuel afterwards. You need and it's hard when you don't get that final meal in right after training. You're not going to be able to get your total calorie in for the day, and it kind of accumulates, right? Like, if you have one night like that, it's about the overall kind of 5 to 7 days of intake of calories, and it's like you're not going to be able to hit that if you don't hit your daily amount. And you're not going to get the recovery needed, and then it's just going to snowball from there. So you really do need to make sure you get it in at the right times. But obviously, when you're, like I said before, when you're in a sympathetic state, you don't feel like eating, but you do have to eat. So the easiest way to do that is kind of do your warm downs, make sure you're in a sympathetic state where you're in a recovery state, and you'll feel more like eating, you'll feel more like sleeping, and you'll be able to get it in. But someone like yourself, you're a mountain of a man. So it's like, you're going to have to get the calories in required, right? Yeah. Hope that answers your question. But
back when I was at 81 kilos and I was always dieting, and I could easily skip meals, and because coming up to a competition, my amount of eating would drop, at a steady rate towards the day of the weigh-in. But nowadays, at 100 kilos, if I miss a meal, my whole world falls apart.
Yeah,
I absolutely fall to pieces now. So
I didn't have any trouble making weight back in the day, but now if I miss a meal, I'm like, I know.
Start to panic.
Yeah,
sweating. Sure. Can't concentrate. That's why I said this might be quite maybe a broad question, and I suppose there's obviously individual needs of different athletes, different weight groups. But is there any kind of specific exercises or maybe style of training that you would say would be essential for like a judo player to make sure they incorporate?
I think the weight groups dictate a lot of that as well. Like, someone in a higher weight category is not going to need a higher amount of absolute strength, right? They're going to need an overall, a lot more strength than somebody from a low category. That really underpins the other attributes, like, if you don't have that absolute, that top end strength, like, 2 times body weight, say, squat, then, you're not going to produce as much force. So that kind of underpins the other attributes like force and speed. But when I'm looking, even if they're a heavyweight athlete, I'm still looking at developing the maximum amount of force they can produce. Speed, their change of direction is really important. And, what kind of separates, kind of jiu-jitsu or other grappling sports from judo is that spending a lot more time on your feet requires, more dynamic approach to change of direction and lateral movements and those sort of aspects. Essentially, you've got to be able to carry someone else's body weight and then throw them through the floor. So you need the ability to stand on one leg and actually produce power. So it's extremely dynamic and from one category to the next, you've got someone who's 60 kilograms. They're going to move much more dynamic. They require a lot more, jumping and plyometric kind of stuff. Someone at the other end, in the absolute category is going to need a lot more strength to actually do what they do.
And then maybe on the other side of that, is there any, because there's obviously a lot of different styles of training, fad workouts and bits and pieces. Is there anything you think that would be very detrimental to judo, to an athlete? Is there anything you think they should stay away from?
Basically, if you, like I said before, if we push, an athlete too far, they're overtrained, they actually go backwards in performance. I think, putting yourself in a powerlifting program, it might, it's going to work initially. You're going to get, good results as you would for any type of training you get into. When you first start, you're more able to take on more variety and you're able to adapt from the majority of different exercises and modalities that are used. And you're going to see progress. But the thing is, we need to maximize that progress and actually push you towards developing strength and speed and power. So all the things that underpin those are important, and getting a strong foundation to be able to do that is like going into something that only uses one modality, like powerlifting. It's lifting things slow. It's just lifting heavy things. So you're gonna develop your power because it underpins power. And someone who can lift 200 kilos for 5 reps can easily move 100 kilos faster than someone that can only do 1 rep of 100 kilo, right? So you're going to have more power there, but because you're stronger, but you're not going to be able to utilize it very fast. So, you have to think about the people you're fighting against. If you want to be the best in the world, you've actually got to be dynamic and be strong doing it, because they are going to be. But putting yourself into something like powerlifting is just going to develop that one attribute, right? And I think that's where athletes have to be careful and look at more than just straight lines, because you're getting strong, but you're getting strong with a hip hinge, you're getting strong. That's great, and that underpins it. Something you do in strength and conditioning to develop the ability to not get bent over, to lift someone up and throw them to the floor. But then again, you need to think about moving laterally and in other planes of motion, right? It is and that's where sort of injuries come in. They're not really thinking about your sport. They're not really thinking about the attributes, the injury risk, the things that make a good athlete within that sport. They actually think about their sport and powerlifting and how to get someone good in powerlifting, how to just help you pick things up and put things down, which is obviously essential and underpinning, but, not focusing on those certain aspects and injury risks within your sport will inherently, maybe open yourself up to more injury and put undue stress on your body.
Yeah, I suppose it goes into what you were saying earlier about making sure your training supplements your judo. And if you end up focusing too much on one area, whether you say it's like powerlifting or any other kind of lifting, or obviously there's the Olympic lifting, or kettlebell, any one of these categories, if you spend too much time in that category, you'll get good at it, and it might have a bit of a benefit, but ultimately it's not going to have enough of a benefit overall. There's the thing with judo, there's so many different elements that you need to support. Like you say, you do need that power, but you also need the explosive power, explosive strength, and to be able to be dynamic and to move in different directions. and endurance, and then do it fast. And
Exactly.
You've got to do it. Your S&C probably has to be a bit more of a jack of all trades to be the master of the judo.
Yeah, that's right. And and know when to utilize these tools as well. Like, you have to take into account, know the sport and know when to utilize the tools and how, on the same side of the coin, you're developing power or strength in the way of powerlifting. Also, when you get into power sports, essentially are Olympic lifting, right? And if you don't have that strength that underpins Olympic lifting, then they can be detrimental. There's more injury risk. Look at CrossFit and things like that when it's kind of gone off the radar. Too many people going to physio. You're not training for that sport. You're training for judo and just inherently doing quite technical lifts when they're not necessary is going to be detrimental as well, because you aren't developing those strength attributes to underpin power, and you're just doing the one kind of modality.
So we focus quite a bit on maybe towards more aspiring top level athletes, judo players that are looking to maybe be active on the competitive scene. What advice would you have for people that are doing judo as more of a recreational hobby? Do you think supplementing that with strength work, some cardio, I think that's a good idea? Do you think it's a bad idea? What's your take on it?
Oh yeah, you need to be doing conditioning and cardio. Essentially, all of this is interrelated. Like the way, this is why at the start I'm talking about the assessments where you're assessing someone's ability to move their body weight without weight. So conditioning is essentially their ability to move against low resistances for a very long amount of time, right? That's endurance, strength, and also, the strength aspect comes into play where you've got to produce more power over a small amount of time. And, all of these are interrelated. Your ability to back that up, your ability to recover is important. Basically, all of these things keep you on the mat and maximizing your sport and your ability to do more and get better at the sport technically and tactically, and that's number one. But for any athlete or any recreational athlete, which I think you're kind of getting at, is they also they're in it for themselves. They're in it to improve. They're in it because they love the sport, and that's me right now. I feel right. I essentially just train to stay hard to kill. That's what I call it. I train to enjoy the physical, mental, and social aspects that you find in judo. And this is what I love about, combat sport in itself, that, like strength training's going to give you the physical wellness to it. But what I think combat sports offers is all of those, right? It's a community of people within the sport. It challenges you to think, to kind of push yourself physically, and it touches on all those aspects. And it's something, this is why strength and conditioning is important for me, because it keeps me in the sport. It keeps me able to fight people like yourself day in, day out, right? Because I enjoy that. I enjoy a good rumble. And, for recreational athletes, or not athletes, just recreational participants in combat sports, is really important to make sure you maintain that, the ability and the physical attributes that allow you to stay injury-free and remain on the mat doing what you enjoy. So I really do think it's kind of more important for those people, because if you want to spend your life doing it, you got to kind of, if you haven't already developed that peak of muscle mass, you go into later life. I mean, majority of people are going to experience things like, osteoporosis and, which is bone degradation, and they're going to have muscle loss, which will lead to inherent injuries, and we need to maintain that. I want to be doing judo when I'm 90, man. I want to be doing it forever. So, that's why I think it's so important to myself still. I'm still going to be doing strength and conditioning. I'm still going to keep myself ready and available to jump on the mat at any time. And I really think, recreational athletes, if you want to be doing it for a long time, you got to be thinking about these attributes. You're not necessarily going to be pushing yourself as hard as some of those other athletes and dedicate all that time and effort to the same thing. But yeah, 2 sessions a week, like in the gym, making sure you've got those physical attributes, I think is extremely important, and ensuring you can benefit from what combat sports offers you.
And how do you think your approach to strength and conditioning changes as you get older?
Obviously some of those other things in life become more important. At one stage, me and you were going 100% at our judo, and that's all we thought about. That's all we cared about, was just getting better at judo. Being world champion, being Olympic champion, that's all we cared about. And everything we did, everything we woke up for was just judo. But now, as you get older, other things become your, area of importance. And for me now, my area of importance is, making sure that I'm the most educated at what I do, the best at what I do, which is strength and conditioning now. That's my number one focus. And, I want to be giving back as much as I can to, judo and combat sports. And that's my passion. That's my number one objective. That's what drives me when I wake up every single morning. Now that that's my focus, strength and conditioning, to do more judo, doing more judo, and, other things that I do now, jiu-jitsu, are incredibly important to me, but they come second to being the best at what I do and the clients that I work with, and, the education that I'm taking on and the research that I want to do within that area to contribute to combat sport. So, yeah, obviously other priorities like family and making sure you have a roof over your head, those things come come foremost. So, we can't expect those recreational participants to contribute as much to their strength and conditioning, but you're going to find benefits in 2 times a week. You don't need to be in the gym 5 times a week, which is, like what most people, I guess, assume, right? I need to get in the gym as much as I can, where, for the majority of athletes, I endorse 3 times a week. If they're putting on weight, 4 times a week. Like, judo is your number one sport, and that's your priority because you love it. You might not necessarily love strength conditioning. It's just going to keep you in the game longer. That's all. Like judo is, in combat sport is my number one passion, is, not strength and conditioning, but strength and conditioning is my livelihood. It's what I want to be good at. It's what I want to be the best in the world at. And I just want to be able to give back to judo and combat sports.
So earlier on, you touched on mobility and stretching and sort of like looking at the importance of that. Is there anything in particular, how long should people be stretching for? Because I think this is something that's, well, from my own experience, I'm terrible at stretching. I'll do 5 minutes here. Usually I do stretching as a reactionary stretching. So I'm like, right, can't stand up now, back's gone, better start stretching. I know as soon as my back goes, it's because my hamstrings are tight. But I won't, I'm terrible at not stretching all the time and making sure it's a habit. How often should people maybe be stretching, doing mobility exercises to pretty much prevent injuries and as we just touched on, just be able to participate in the sport without any kind of, reduce the risk of injuries. I don't think we can say without any injuries categorically.
This is an interesting topic and something that's greatly influenced my career. In fact, I was greatly influenced by the culture within judo to stretch, and it was always utilized as an important fundamental building block of your physical attributes. But we now know that the tolerance of the tissue is the most important thing. And, this is where strength and conditioning comes into play, I think, to its full extent within a general preparation phase. And generally preparing an athlete is developing an athlete's ability to have or move in a greater range of motion. Within this COVID time has been difficult for a lot of people, but in research, it's actually allowed a lot of people to do reviews of all the research that's out there. So now we're getting a lot of good research on, modalities like this that we've culturally kind of been exposed to. I guess we're learning where and how it applies. And it was something like, I think it was 2019 that research came out, actually, that actually through stretching out as a supplemental, part of a well-rounded physical regimen for the normal individual, right? Because, what is developing more range of motion going to give them? It's not going to give them much. They've just got to be strong to stand off this chair and, walk around, do the things they want to do. And, but obviously in combat sports, developing that wider range of motion is important to get into positions you want to be in and need to be in to throw somebody, or, build a wider range of motion so you can evade certain positions. Getting into those positions is not the most important thing. I think the most important thing is being able to tolerate the forces in those positions. Because if we can't tolerate the forces and those acute forces are higher than what the tissue can tolerate, it's going to break, right? So, inherently stretching is potentially dangerous, right? If we static stretch to the end of range, we've got the muscle spindles and we've got the Golgi tendon organ and the muscle junction, and they send signals to our brain to say, this force and the amplitude of this force is too much for this tissue. We're only going to be using this amount of range of motion, right? But at speed, muscles, they've got to be able to react really fast to stabilize, to actually send that signal to oppose that stress. And, because the forces in judo are really fast and dynamic and from multiple directions, we need to have the tolerance in tissue to be able to oppose that. And if you're stretching, right, you're at the end of the range of motion, holding it, and you're telling the brain we're safe in this position. So you kind of get it gives the brain the false idea that you're stable in that position, and it allows you more range of motion, right? But, we've all experienced those. We stretch and then we haven't got that range, 2 days later, we haven't got that range anymore, right? Because the brain is actually, taking information from the Golgi tendon organ, from the muscle spindles to say, we're safe, we're not safe, and it's cutting that range of motion down again. But to develop range of motion, new research has identified that people that go through static stretching programs or stretching programs as a whole, that range of motion can be developed by strength training. There is statistically no difference between the range of motion that can be developed doing stretching protocols to doing strength and conditioning, which is basically developing the tolerance of that tissue. And what strength and conditioning does within that, within that general preparation phase and developing that athleticism of an athlete, but also throughout the program is, right, developing tolerance of the tissue so can it be exposed to forces so you don't get those injuries and niggles and strains which close down that range of motion. So, for an athlete, stretching can potentially put you at more injury risk, and it certainly did while I was an athlete. I actually contribute a lot of the injuries that I got from stretching, and one bad one was actually from stretching. But it's we need to be developing the tolerance of our tissue as the most basic fundamental property of strength to resist the force within that range of motion. If we give it that false sense of security and we put that range on it, It's either going to get closed down or it's going to leave it more susceptible to a greater amount of force than it can tolerate. And that's when you get the strains and the niggles, and you're not going to be a good athlete, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe just touch on there quickly on the difference between stretching and mobility. So there's different types of stretching as well, but then just as a sort of a brief overview for people that maybe don't quite know the difference of how to approach.
Yeah, like I said, I would approach stretching from the form of developing range of motion through strength training. And what the strength training it does is going through the widest range of motion possible gives the end range of motion more tolerance to the force it's exposed to. Obviously, this is why a great range of different tools are important, because to be able to load it through different range of motion to the point where we can actually throw someone for Taitoshi or something in a great range of motion, we need to have the ability to be strong in that position. So, like tolerance of tissue will allow that range to be developed, sending those, making sure the muscle spindles and the Golgi tendon organ know that's strong and you can withstand that force within that range. It's going to just allow you to produce force within those positions and won't be shut down by the neuromuscular system. So long-term range of motion essentially is developed through strength and conditioning and applying load to those positions. And that's why I say, like powerlifting isn't enough, because this is just in a straight line. It doesn't give you lateral, it doesn't give you multi-directional kind of strength to move under load within those positions, but even the strength to move with force and explosive power through those ranges, right? And that's kind of, what it comes down to. Obviously, if you're opposing a force, but you're actually, driving as fast as you can into that power, it just puts a whole lot more stress and torque onto the muscle. And we need to be able to withstand that. Otherwise, that's when we get injury. Whereas, like I said before, like just holding that range and giving it the false sense of, okay, we're safe within this because we've held body weight within that range, and that's what we're exposed to. That's fine, that's safe, and it gives you more range. But this is why just going into something like gymnastics is somewhat gives you the false sense of security that you're developing balance and strength within those ranges. It's good to a point, but we've actually if I've got to throw you, there's a lot more force involved than just moving my own body weight. So, you need those tools to be able to increase that amount of load you've got on there, but the amount of force that can be expressed within those ranges as well. And that's going to maintain your range of motion. And obviously, literature backs that up as well. And, for the general population even, they've said throw it out. But I think for our population, it's imperative and important that you do develop that range of motion and tolerance in tissue to avoid the acute and chronic dangers of overloading that tissue, whether in the short term that single application of force that's greater than that tissue can cope with, or in the long term, the degradation of that tissue because of lower amounts of forces that, can't be tolerated by the tissue.
Yeah, I like that point you just mentioned about the gymnastics. Now, this is only anecdotal evidence, so I'm not going to put too much stock in it, but from like things I've seen, when coaching kids, you get kids that turn up to the club and you can tell they've done a small amount of gymnastics work, and we're doing the sort of tumbling and the rolling at the beginning of the warm-up. You can really see a difference with those kids, and then when it comes to throwing, they're maybe not as, they got better spatial awareness going through the air. They're able to maybe spin out of things or just control themselves better. But then further down the line, I remember, I think it was a young girl back in the UK, she came and she was excellent gymnast, right? Very flexible. And then she came to judo and she was too flexible. And her body was actually going into the positions, and these positions she was okay in when she was doing the gymnastics. But then all of a sudden, it's this extreme flexible positions mixed with this force being loaded on by the other person, and she ended up just riddled with injuries. And it was terrible because she could get into these positions and she'd like be turning out of a hold down and her arm would be like twisted round up her back, round the back and things. And she'd be out, but then she'd end up obviously with a shoulder injury because her arms she was flexible in the joints, but not flexible with the force then added to that. And it was actually detrimental how flexible she was.
Oh, 100%. And, like not everybody needs more range of motion. And that's what, the good thing is about having a wide range of modalities to apply when and where and who for, right? Like if you've got a warm up, I'm not going to apply static stretching for anyone, particularly in a warm up, because you're actually putting yourself in a rested state where if you need to warm up, you're going to be gradually warming up the neuromuscular system for, the application of force to recruit more motor units in the muscle and produce force. Like you want to be on fire, you want to be ready to go, right? So that's taking them into a parasympathetic state. But, for particularly those people, as a strength and conditioning coach, we're utilizing the warm up to apply specific modalities that are going to be important for them that underpin the next level of progression. We kind of want to use that time. Think about how much time you spend warming up. You want to utilize every time available to give them the things they need to encourage progression and help them develop the attributes that they need that underpin judo and other combat sports. And I think a lot of people wasted time in warm-ups doing static stretching where they could be utilizing things like, especially for this demographic, the more mobile. And a lot of females are more mobile, right? They lack the strength that is necessary within those wider range of motions, and that's someone at the higher end, the absolute end of the mobility continuum. We obviously have you'd assume a guy is at the other end of the mobility continuum where they've got the inability to move anywhere, right? They're really restricted in range of motion. But that demographic is going to need, more mobilizing, more moving through those ranges, and that, that girl you were talking about that is a gymnast can get in those positions. She needs stability through range and she needs to develop the tolerance of the tissue, and actually it's not going to close down that range. And anecdotally, I have clients that they come to me because like their shoulders popping out the sockets, both shoulders are popping out of their sockets, one worse than the other because he's doing jiu-jitsu. That force is way too much for his body because he's really mobile, right? And that kind of demographic needs that stability and strength to be able to resist those forces. And, that's a good example of when and how we apply these, someone with one tool is going to apply that one tool to this demographic as well, right? Because they think it's inherently good for the individual and the sport. Because range of motion is important. It's incredibly important. But how you develop that range of motion is more important because we actually want to resist that injury. We want to make sure we can remain on the mat when we do go on there. Stretching is important, and majority of the stretching I utilize is moving through range of motion because we've got to have the ability to move through ranges of motion with our body weight. Yeah, like I utilize those kind of stretching modalities, things like controlled articular rotations. I use that, pretty much moving through the widest range of motion possible and creating an isometric load at the extremity of that range. Things like that, but they're applied in specific circumstances for specific people to get the result. And if you look at foam rolling as well, it's really a neural adaptation or acute kind of in that time and space. When you kind of load the tissue using a foam roller, you're actually getting the neural adaptation, getting a release of the tissue momentarily. It'll only be for that training session. So, starting with a foam roller and kind of building towards the session from there would be what I recommend for athletes that need it. Athletes that can already move through that range just don't need it. They're going to get straight into moving and warming up their body, warming up the body and moving through greater range of motions to kind of induce that blood flow and get the core temperature up, getting the blood flowing through the peripheral tissue. So then, you're starting to build the muscle up for activity and build the body and ready the body for that activity. Yeah, so I would never put a static stretch in a warm-up, but, like culturally we still do in judo. I think I say there's a lot of stuff we can take from things we know now from strength and conditioning and apply to the sport to progress. How we prepare these athletes. Like what we don't see is how the best athletes in the world are actually preparing right now, right? And they're following the science. Even Japan, they are following the science, but they're top athletes. They might follow what their club does on a lower level, but when they're in the National Institute, they are, they are influenced by, if you saw, some of the strength and conditioning that's done by those athletes, it would be similar to what you would expect a top level athlete to, they aren't influenced by those cultural aspects anymore. And I know a lot of the influence of what we do at club level is taken from Japan. So I use that as an example. But, like we need to progress some of these aspects of judo to make sure people stay safe, and we're preparing them to do their best when they are on the mat. Yeah, and making sure they don't get injured. So.
Yeah, I suppose like you say there, because obviously the top athletes, the way the training is really closely guarded secrets, and you see some of the, some of the videos like Ono's been putting out recently, and like the weights he's throwing around it's just ridiculous. I mean, he'd probably be able to be like a relatively good level competitor as an Olympic lifter, right? With some of the weights he's putting up. Never mind as a
100%.
world class, maybe one of the best judo players. I suppose that sort of all that information slowly trickles down to the club level, where there's still a lot of probably like not misinformation, but maybe just like old wives' tale kind of dinosaur training, and some of that really does have its time and a place. But it would be maybe how efficient that type of training is now. And like you say, I know there's times where see static stretching and that kind of thing is still quite prevalent, and just making for most people, they're not going to be reading the scientific literature, right? They're not going to be sat down with a morning cup of tea, a slice of toast, and the latest journal on.
I wouldn't expect anyone to be either.
It's hard for that type of thing. I suppose what the main things I've taken away from this conversation are going to be applying a little bit of everything to supplement your judo training. So if you make sure if judo is going to be your main focus, and then when you're approaching your strength and conditioning and you're looking at what to do, and to maybe, like you say, you're applying a little bit of mobility work, you're applying a little bit of your strength work, a little bit of conditioning work. This is more so as a like recreational athlete. And then obviously maybe a bit more of a focus if you're being you're looking at being more of a professional competitive athlete, to focus in a little bit more, but still only, not focusing too much on one particular area. And I suppose the other thing I'm taking away from this is finding those people, obviously doing your own research, but then also finding those people that are experts, whether that's in strength and conditioning, your judo, finding a good judo coach, finding a good S&C coach, finding a good nutritional expert who's going to be able to help you, whether you're trying to put weight on, lose weight, maintain, and what else would you want? You'd want probably someone who's a good physio, a good physio in there just in case. So would that be pretty accurate?
We have touched on a lot,
but
nothing really specific, and we've established that it depends on a lot of aspects. The individual and even what sport they are, what category they are. Their attributes that underpin their performance. So, it's hard to say, hey, do this, do this, do this, do this.
It's such a vast subject on its own.
Yeah.
And then you're having to then link that vast subject to support another sport, right?
And read the latest literature.
Yeah. It's always being updated.
Yeah.
Constantly.
100%. And it needs to be. We're like, just as research is being, progressed, there was a lot of research back in the day to substantiate, like because stretching does feel good. Inherently, people do, stretching. I'm going to put a lot of yogis out of their job. But, we need to progress like research progresses, like, our influences in everyday life progress, our, the way we focus on, our physical attributes and health. The same could be said for sport. And I think judo is still yet to be influenced by a lot of that research and science. And, I see a lot of crossover between the principles and the methods that are developed for strength and conditioning and applying force and developing the body that can be applied across the board into combat sport and coaching, which are going to be fundamental and really important to progression of the sport and seeing athletes thrive and the practitioners enjoy for as long as they can. And that's why I dedicated myself to this area. And you're going to expect a lot of resources to come for, those of you out there that need this stuff. I'm incredibly passionate about providing this and really getting it out there. Like, I've dedicated the rest of my life to this journey, right? Where I had, dedicated my life to the Olympic gold medal, going for Olympic Games, and, over 10 years training internationally to develop my skills at that level. But now, my passion's here to give back, because I wouldn't have gone as far as I did without the teams and the people that were passionate about judo. Coaches, the strength and conditioning coaches that developed and really allowed me to get as far as I did and put as much as I did into the sport. And, I won't be stopping anytime soon. I love it. Yeah.
And if people want to get more information from you, because I know you do online coaching as well, and if people are based in Sydney or anywhere around the world, basically, they can get in touch with you. Where would they be able to find you? The website, fightersperformance.com.au. I don't post a lot because I'm very limited on time, with the academic stuff I'm pursuing and also the work that I do. So I'm not across social media at all. That's why I say you can expect these things. But yes, obviously, I'm full on with my clients and I dedicate a lot of time to that. And that's my priority, along with my development of the academic side of things for the job. But yeah, you can contact me over social media. So that's Fighter Performance on Instagram. Mark Brewer _coach on Instagram. Yep. Or Fighters Performance on Instagram. Yep. And you've got your own podcast as well. I have Fighters Performance Podcast. Yep. Currently on hold. But it has some great content on there from... Yeah. 15, 16 episodes, I think. Yeah, something like that. So yeah. There's more to come. I have some recorded that need to be put out there. We're currently on... hiatus. Yes. But yeah, we'll get them out there, so stay tuned. There's a lot of great information on there already. Yep. There's stuff from great strength and conditioning coaches and, they touch on specific aspects of strength and conditioning as well, and also psychologists and different areas of performance, nutritionists. And, it is important to get this information out there and make it available, and that's what I'm passionate about. That is why I started the Fighters Performance Podcast, to get, people and the minds and the community behind combat sports together, to get that information out there and more available for people to absorb. Yeah. Too much information. Yeah, too much. It's too much for 1 hour podcast. So, but no, I really appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on. Awesome, man. Thanks for the invite. Yeah, it's been fun. Cheers, brother.